It's July 28, 2024, and I'm with Mr. John J. Jeckovich.
429-295-65.
Perfect. That's his dog tag number, so that's kind of like the password to start reading. We're reading his book called Their Mother's Sons. Maybe you should just put a picture of it up there. Just stick it in there like that.
David, don't give anybody that book.
No, no.
Don't give anybody that book to read.
Their Mother's Sons.
Well, I can't read it.
Their Mother's Sons. We're on chapter 11 at page 341. The book is about 900 pages long, and this chapter we're on is titled Passwords, Killed in Action, and Hospital Bound. Pick up from where we left off yesterday. Mr. John Jeckovich at this time is at the Battle of Bulge, and a couple readings ago he thought the worst was over, but little did he know the worst was about to
Battle
come.
of the Bulge, yeah.
And the December prior to this, the month prior, in 44, most of the top brass, like the generals and the colonels, they thought that the war was ended too, because some of them went golfing, others were having custom-made pearl-handled pistols and shotguns made, and others went to a wedding. But there's one top brass that didn't think the war was ended, and that was General Patton.
Oh, blood and guts,
And General Patton said that, well, before I say what he said, what was your run-in with General Patton you had during the Battle of Bulge? What happened?
Right.
When you were finally made it to some cover, and then Patton came up to you, what did he tell you?
He said, get back up to that checkpoint.
So he came in, you were finally getting out of the cold into a barn, and about 2 or 3 in the morning, him and his troops.
Get to that checkpoint up ahead. Get.
Yeah, so he threw you out of the barn.
Well, posting camouflage that stupid Jeep and trailer.
Well, anyways, where all the other top brass were on some type of holiday, they thought the war was over. Patton had a suspicion that it wasn't. So Patton said, a few days before his birthday, which was Christmas Day, he goes, it'd be a beautiful birthday to kill some Germans today. It'd be a beautiful birthday to kill some Germans today. Even though Patton looked like he was in the 70s, the man was only in his 50s. He looked a lot older than he actually was. He looked a lot older than he actually was.
He got hit with that stupid cart.
Yeah, and he was also in World War II. And he was also in World War I.
Yeah.
And World War II was a much differently type of war to be fought. Much different type of war. So anyways, that was your run-in with Patton. And now I'll continue where you guys are basically surrounded, and you're trying to work your way out of being surrounded by Nazis and Panzer tanks all around you. So here we go. There were 4 more tanks, no Panzers, and 2 Panzers and a couple of Mark IVs lying in a draw behind the 1st Battalion position. They were almost concealed from their view, but every time they rode over a high spot in the draw, they would expose part of their turret and cannon. The ground cover was good enough that our guns could not get at them. One of them felt fairly confident to override the draw and come directly at us. That was a mistake, for he paid dearly. Our 75s and 57s opened up on him, and the tank exploded in a huge ball of fire. The other 3 tankers, seeing what happened, used the draw for cover and hightailed it out of there. So the one tank came directly at you, thinking that his armor was so powerful, his armor was so protected, that your 75s and 57s wouldn't do anything against them, but it did.
And they had hard covers, yeah, they had cover.
Yeah. We kept firing at them, moving about whenever a German would make an attempt to move on us. We were still trying to free up the riflemen, so now the riflemen are pinned down. The riflemen can't move in the clearing. The mortar and artillery barrages increased in intensity, and it was only a question of time before they would get all of us. We were running out of options and hoping they had a plan of escape for us back at the regiment. Faintly to the rear of our position, we heard a familiar rumble of tanks, and the first reaction was that we were surrounded. There were, much to our relief, there were Shermans etching our path in the snow and seeking as much cover as they could, while avoiding our troops scattered all along the snow-covered path. Immediately, one tank was hit, twice by the left by a high-velocity gun, wounding the driver and 3 other crew members. The one man was incinerated inside the tank, and another Sherman was hit in the turret by a shell that killed the gunner. The tanker backed the tank into a draw and finally bogged down. The tank could not be salvaged and later had to be destroyed. The other tanks, how would you destroy a tank?
Huh?
You say later it had to be destroyed. How would you destroy a
So
tank?
open the hatch, throw a grenade in it.
Okay. The other tanks cleared the area and were left to their own devices. It became deadly quiet all of a sudden. For the first time today, fear overcame me and the realization that something terrible was about to happen. Lape sensed it also, and I imagine everyone laying in the clearing must have felt it. This was it. We were not going to squeak out of this one. So most of these other skirmishes, you were able to squeak by, get out of there.
Yeah.
But this one here, you didn't think you were going to get out, right? The tanks were our last hope. They played a gamble and lost. We were on our own. We were way out on a limb. Suddenly, the 2 Shermans appeared out of nowhere, trying to get into a protected position to fire their 75s. I saw them approach the cutoff in a draw, using it for cover, when the German SP gun picked off the head lead tank. It went up in a burst of flames and black smoke. We could see 2 tankers crawl out of the escape hatch at ground level. One was wounded, and I could see a trail of blood on the snow as they crawled away. The other tank pulled back into the draw and commenced firing his 75 over the heads of the pinned down riflemen. His position was close to ours, and we began receiving concentrated mortar and artillery fire as the Germans attempted to zero in on our tank. I motioned to Lape and the squad members that we have to get out of here. I grabbed the receiver and Lape followed me with the tripod as the next barrage started to come over. It was at this moment I lost sight of the remaining squad members. One member, I was aware of their position, and the next time I turned to check on him, he was gone. I learned later, when I returned from the hospital, that one was mortally wounded and the other had been taken off and was never seen again. So one of the soldiers took off
AWOL.
and you never seen him again.
Yeah.
I wonder what happened to him. Where would he have
Yeah,
gone?
found some farmhouse, some girl, and that was it. Started a whole new family.
He never came back to the States.
No, never came back. Started a new family.
Never to be seen again.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's
Wow.
marked. He's marked. They ever get him down here, they kill him.
Yeah.
20.
I stopped short and rather deep shell hole, dropped the receiver into it, and waited for Lape. In a few seconds, he was beside me with a tripod, As he started to unload it into the hole, there was a thunderous explosion a few feet to our right. The force of the concussion threw me out of the hole onto the frozen ground and the snow. The receiver and tripod were badly damaged. I immediately looked for Lape and saw him several yards away, crumpled up position. I crawled up where he was lying, and I could see he was hit. I did not know how extensively until I reached his side and turned him slump body over. To my horror, half of his skull was sheared off from the forehead on up. The glasses he was wearing were dangling from one ear, still precariously hanging on a bit of flesh. His steel helmet was lying near him and his contents of his upper skull. As I looked at what remained of Lape, I thought of what Fink and I promised ourselves to watch over him at all cost. We had failed him utterly. I pulled his eyelids closed and removed his glasses dangling from his only ear. Isn't that funny that Lape's brother recently died a few years ago, and in his obituary of his Lape's brother, he lived a long life, that he mentioned that his younger brother, Lape, was killed in World War II. And ironically, Lape's brother lived for 20 years, only blocks away from your Florida residence. Isn't that ironic?
Huh.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
He lived right down the road from you, we never knew. He sure he would have loved to talk to you. Sure he would have loved to talk to you. As I lay there staring at Lape, the feeling traumatic remorse at his death and dereliction of my duty regarding his safety, I felt a warm liquid sensation over my lower torso. At first I thought I urinated in my pants and reached down to felt the wetness. When I pulled my hand up, it was full of blood, my blood. I turned my leg inward and received a series of sharp pains throughout my body. It was then I realized that I was hit. I had a large gash on my upper right leg and was bleeding profusely. I looked at the ammo barrels, but there was no one in sight. My first impulse was to stop the bleeding. I reached over to my aid packet and fumbled about, obtaining a large dressing pad. I wrapped it tightly around my leg and tied its leaders as tight as I could. I felt the strength of my body slowly ebbing out. I looked down at the dressing and I could see the bleeding coming through the gauze already. It was when I became conscious of the shelling going on around me, I crawled back to the hole where we had left the gun. As I lay in a hole, trying to regain my strength, I thought of the warning we had about being wounded in sub-zero weather. We were told to seek help as quickly as possible, as we were liable to go into shock much more quickly in the cold weather. The pain in my leg was excruciating. I knew I had a piece of shrapnel in from the way it felt when I moved. The pain was increasing. Fearing I would pass out and freeze to death, I reached into my aid packet for a morphine. It was semi-frozen and would not release. Recalling what a medic once told me, I put the syringe under my armpit and hoped the warmth of my body would thaw it out sufficiently to inject it. I was becoming weaker by the minute, and the pain was increasing. I looked at the tube and it appeared to be in a more liquid state. I broke the vial, exposed the needle, and thrust it into my upper leg. Within minutes of pain had subsided, and I started to crawl where the burned out tank was. Minutes?
15.
As I crawled through the snow, dragging my injured leg, I was having a hard time keeping my rifle from getting dug into the snow. I could see that I was leaving a trail of blood in the snow and was concerned I did not see anyone in the area.
Yeah, right? Huh?
The shelling was still going on, and I thought everyone was keeping their heads down. Even so, there should be some movement, some type of activity going on. I reached the burned out tank, and there was no one about. I could see myself getting weaker, and I followed the tank tracks to the rear where I'd hoped there'd be an aid station. Strangely, I did not pass out. Strangely, I did not pass any medics or anyone else, and I was really becoming apprehensive, fearing I had gotten disoriented and heading in the wrong direction towards the enemy lines. As I crawled over the bank of snow, I must have exposed my position, for a German sniper spotted me and opened fire with his telescopic rifle. I evaded the first two shots, but then he got me on the third shot. I heard a snap and then a dull thud as the round entered my left shoulder. My left arm immediately went limp, and that thought went through my mind that I was going to lose my arm. I rolled down the embankment of snow to get out of sniper's sight and lay there resting for a moment. The morphine shot was beginning to wear off, and I could feel the pain in the leg returning. So right now you're in bad shape. You got your leg bad and your shoulder bad.
Yeah, in the cold weather.
That's pretty bad. That's very traumatic. I looked down and the entire trouser leg and bandage were soaked with blood. I started to crawl, dragging my rifle with a good arm. I tried to stay close to the ground as possible to avoid any sniper fire. My only thought was to keep on going and not pass out. What disturbed me that there was no one around, as I was a good distance from the burned out tank, as well as the firing line. If I had the strength, I could stood and walked, but my pace was slowing down, and it took all my strength to pull myself along the snow. The morphine had worn off, and a shrapnel in my leg was tearing up the flesh. Luckily, my arm was not bleeding too much, but I could not use it, and I knew that the round was still lodged in there. I kept telling myself, you got to keep on going, or you'll bleed or freeze to death. Suddenly, I remembered what my father said to me several months before his death. We were arguing about the treatment of my mother when he blurted out, I hope you get your ass shot off when you're in the Army. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. You remember that?
Yeah.
I recalled the stern, angry look on his face when he said it. Strangely, the thought rejuvenated and renewed my strength. Though it renewed your strength. Suddenly there was a vehicle approaching. I did not care if it was German or American. My only thought was there was someone there. I could see my snow-crusted eyelids being visible, a large red cross on its side. The last thing I heard was, I passed out. Take it easy, soldier. Take it easy, soldier. We got you now. As my eyes closed, my thoughts were, it's too late. You are dead, and as usual, you missed another opportunity to live. I opened up my eyes and faintly looked up. I thought I was back in the Jean's cottage, having fallen asleep on the couch, and she was now looking down at me and smiling. In reality, it was an army nurse with black hair taking my pulse and smiling at me. How are you doing, Johnny? She asked, smiling down at me. The word Johnny brought me back to reality. No one but my mother called me Johnny. That's good. The attending nurse informed me that I was in a forward aid station and had gotten some blood and several large pieces of shrapnel removed from my leg. Coming to my senses, I remembered my left arm desperately reached for it, thinking that it was gone. So you thought your arm was gone?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, yep.
Wow. She sensed my apprehension, smiled again, and stated that the slug had been removed. It had gone through your submuscular tissue and nerve endings. She assumed that it had been a spent round coming from a long distance off, and much of its velocity has entered my shoulder. I grasped my left arm and started to rub it tenderly. The lieutenant also stated I would be evacuated to the regimental medical collecting station, then on to a division clearing station, and would eventually wind up in Paris at a general hospital. Do you remember that quite clearly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. The war was over for a while. War was over for you a while, at least, she smiled, and jotted my vital statistics on a clipboard at the foot of the cot. But what really happened is you went to a hospital in Paris,
Yeah.
you got your strength again, they put a bandage on it and said, you're back out.
Oh, yeah.
They sent you back out, right?
Yeah, it's fit for duty.
Fit for duty.
Fit for duty.
How many months were you in the hospital in Paris?
In Paris, about 3 or 4 weeks, that's it.
What?
3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, wow. I was transferred by ambulance to a divisional clearing station. Somehow I missed the regional medical collecting station. I was brought by a stretcher to a large room, part of a chateau of sorts, and deposited on one of the cots. There were probably 20 or 30 cots in a row, and they're all occupied. It was difficult to distinguish units from men they were from, as most were shirtless and covered with bandages or dressings. Did he also have wounded German soldiers there?
That what?
Did they also have wounded German soldiers in these hospitals?
Yeah.
So if you're the enemy, you also went there
Yeah.
too. There were many Army nurses and doctors scurrying about, and it appeared to be a busy place. It was here that the further emergency operations were performed and our wounds stabilized. I was taken to the x-ray room where my shoulder and leg were x-rayed, and I was told that my shoulder wound was not that serious. The bullet had been spent, as the nurse at the forward station suggested. There was some loss of muscle tissue, and most serious aspect of it, shattering some nerve endings along the shoulder. This would explain the numbness I experienced in my arm. They would attend to this when I reached the evacuation hospital. My leg was another matter, a bit more serious, but not life-threatening in any way. I lost a considerable amount of muscle tissue, in which I never recovered, but more serious aspect was the remaining in the hospital, which had penetrated deeply into the cavity of the leg. They would evaluate it further, make a final decision regarding its disposition. They returned to my cot, and I pondered all the Army doctors had told me. I did not think I was seriously wounded, and hoped they would not start probing again. A tall brunette nurse began giving me penicillin injections every 4 hours, which was the beginning of an endless ritual. Most of the time I was hospitalized. She smiled good-naturedly as she swabbed my arm with alcohol in preparation for the injection. She stated as she made notations on my chart that I would be transferred to an evacuation hospital.
5 minutes.
And did not shortly and I would be on my way to Paris. The evening corpsman brought me a steak and fried potatoes, Brussels sprouts, coffee, and an apple pie. I ate them ravishly, juggling the overladen tray on my lap as I tried to sit up on my cot. I could not finish the entire meal, as I was not used to having that much food at one sitting. I did not realize how little food we had consumed while in combat. What was more, we did not miss it or having any type of hunger pains as a result of it. Later I lay on my cot with most of the lights out in the ward. I thought about Lape and promised Fink that I had made to each other. I felt responsible and recalled what Lape had said about moving back on the mortar fire and how I declined. I should have listened to what he said, for in reality, we're not much help in keeping the Germans from overrunning our position. I thought of Fink, the suddenness of his death, and how I could be more help to him. I realized some of the load responsibilities from him. Also Lester and how I relied on him so much and took too much for granted regarding his ability and his resourcefulness. Theirs were others like Ellis, Huber, Greighton, and Sullivan, how much I had contributed directly to their death. I knew they met their death under combat conditions, but I still felt I did not keep them from harm's way. In a word, I felt guilty. Here I was getting the best treatment, both medically and psychologically. Minutes?
3.
But treated like a hero, while most of my comrades were still lying in the snow, frozen unknown to anyone. Their bodies would not be recovered until the deep snow melted in the spring. It brought back pains and remorse when I identified my father's body at the morgue in the hospital, more so when my mother blamed me directly for his death. I felt the same way now, perturbed and penitent. My physical injuries were not as painful as the mental anguish I felt and perceived. It was warm in the room, warmer than I ever been in a long time, and I thought of the riflemen pinned down in the cold and snow. I wondered what happened to the new replacements if they had survived their first 24 hours in combat. I could still recall their faces, but as lost to remember their names, much of their individual personalities. A couple of husky orderlies came to my cot and said jokingly that I was going in for another ride. They strapped me in a stretcher, bundled me up with blankets, and carried me into the waiting ambulance. There were 3 other wounded soldiers in the ambulance, along with a medic and a nurse. The ambulance was warm inside, and the motion of the vehicle soon put me to sleep. I awoke several times, the orderlies carried me from the ambulance. I was at an evacuation hospital in Florence. My dressing was removed, and I was brought into the operating room on the 2nd floor. I was told by an army surgeon that they would attempt to free up the pinched nerve in my shoulder, which was causing numbness in the arm and hand.
1 minute.
They also wanted to see if they could remove deep embedded piece of shrapnel in my leg. I was given a local anesthetic, and I could hear the medical officers cutting away the tissues in my arm. I felt no pain, but the sound of cutting made me apprehensive. In a few minutes, it was all over with. I had then given another local at this time in my upper arm.
Yeah, just say a few words. We got 20 seconds.
I felt somewhere later hand on my leg, and I started to probe once again. Each time I felt a sharp jab, I would tighten my leg even though it was being held down. Okay.
Wow. That was a tough day there. Well, we'll pick it up tomorrow. Sound good?